He woke up to the sound of his alarm buzzing, a sound that had grown to feel more like a warning than a beginning. The sunlight slipped through the thin curtains, painting stripes across the worn carpet of his small apartment. He sat on the edge of his bed, rubbing his face with both hands, trying to shake the weight of another day that felt exactly like the one before. Life lately seemed like a series of repeated motions. Wake up, go to work, come home, eat, sleep, and do it all over again. There was no excitement, no surprises, just a constant push of time he couldn't slow down. His apartment was quiet except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional distant sound of traffic from the street below. He had lived alone for years. Friends came and went. Some moved away. Others started families, and he stayed behind, observing from the sidelines. He liked his solitude most of the time, but on mornings like this it pressed against him, reminding him that something was missing, though he could never name it clearly. By the time he was dressed in his usual work clothes, a plain shirt and dark pants, he had gone through the motions of breakfast, a slice of bread, a cup of coffee that had grown lukewarm too quickly, and the fleeting thought that maybe today could be different. The thought was fragile and quickly pushed aside as he grabbed his keys and left the apartment. Outside, the city was alive with the sounds of people rushing to work, cars honking, and the occasional bark of a dog. The air carried a faint chill that hinted at the approaching winter. He walked with the crowd, blending in without thinking, his eyes scanning the path ahead but not really seeing anything. He had become a master of invisibility, moving through the world without being noticed. And he liked it that way, or at least he thought he did. As he waited at the crosswalk, his eyes landed on a figure sitting on the curb across the street. The man looked thin, almost frail, wrapped in a worn coat that had seen better days. His shoes were scuffed and his hands shook slightly as he held a small cardboard sign. Something about the stranger caught his attention. Maybe it was the way the man looked so exhausted, or maybe it was the quiet plea in his eyes that seemed to cut through the noise of the city. He hesitated, glancing around at the other pedestrians. Everyone else was busy, some staring at their phones, others talking with friends or muttering to themselves. No one paid the man much attention. He seemed invisible, like a shadow at the edge of the day, and yet he was not invisible to him. There was something in that moment, a subtle nudge in his chest that said, "Look closer, maybe this matters." The man on the curb caught his eye and offered a small, hesitant smile. It was not confident or practiced, but genuine, the kind of smile that comes from hope, even when the world has been unkind. The protagonist felt an unfamiliar pull in his chest, a combination of curiosity and concern. He had seen people like this before, but today it felt different. Today it felt urgent. The light turned green and the crowd surged forward. He stepped into the street and then paused almost instinctively, as if the city itself was holding its breath. For a moment everything else blurred, the rushing cars, the shouting pedestrians, the harsh glare of sunlight reflecting off windows. And all he could see was that man sitting there, waiting, hoping for something he couldn't yet name. He continued walking, but his mind lingered on the stranger. Something about the man's presence refused to let go. He couldn't tell why he cared or why he felt compelled to act. Helping someone he didn't know, someone he might never see again, was not in his nature. Yet there was a small voice in his mind that whispered, maybe today could be different. The office was no refuge from his thoughts. Papers stacked on his desk, emails flooding in, and meetings that seemed to stretch endlessly. His coworkers laughed and shared stories, but he was distant, caught in a swirl of contemplation. His mind kept drifting back to that man on the curb, to the way he had smiled despite everything, to the silent question in his eyes. By lunch, he found himself walking toward the park, a place he had passed countless times without noticing much. Today he went with a purpose he didn't fully understand. The park was quiet in comparison to the bustling streets. Children played in the distance, leaves rustled under the footsteps of joggers, and a few elderly people sat on benches, feeding pigeons or simply watching the day go by. And then he saw him again. The same man still sitting on the curb, though now closer to the edge of the park. He was eating a small sandwich, clearly not enough to fill his hunger, and his eyes flicked toward the passing people with a cautious hope. The protagonist stopped a few feet away, unsure what to say or do. He wasn't used to stepping out of his comfort zone. Helping someone in need was something he had observed in movies or read about in stories, but it had never been part of his life. The man noticed him lingering and nodded slightly, a gesture so simple yet profound. It was a silent invitation, a trust placed in a stranger without expectation or judgment. The protagonist felt a knot of anxiety tighten in his stomach. He was aware of the risk, the possibility of being ignored, of making a fool of himself, of the stranger rejecting any help, but the pull in his chest refused to loosen. Finally, he found himself speaking, his voice low but steady. "Do you need any help?" The man looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes before settling into cautious hope. "Anything you can give," he said softly. His voice was calm, tinged with weariness, but also with gratitude for the simple acknowledgement. They sat together on a nearby bench, and for the first time that day, the protagonist felt present, truly present. He listened as the man spoke of his troubles, loss of a job, family struggles, a series of unfortunate events that had left him on the streets. Each word was a reminder of how fragile life could be, how quickly circumstances could shift. And yet, beneath the hardships, there was a resilience, a refusal to give up. The conversation was slow, careful, and respectful. The protagonist didn't offer grand solutions or empty platitudes. He simply listened, nodding, asking questions when it felt right. It was enough for the man to feel seen, and enough for the protagonist to realize that sometimes listening was more powerful than acting immediately. Hours passed without notice. The city's noise became background hum, and the connection between the two men grew quietly. The protagonist felt an unexpected warmth in his chest, a sense of purpose that had been absent for years. Helping someone else, even in a small way, stirred something inside him, a reminder that life could surprise you when you stepped outside of routine and fear. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting golden hues across the park, the protagonist knew he couldn't walk away. The decision was simple yet monumental. He would give this stranger a chance, not knowing exactly what it would mean or how it would change his life. But the thought of leaving without trying now felt impossible. He offered the man a small bag with food and a few essentials he had grabbed on the way to the park. The man accepted with a gratitude that words could not fully capture. They walked together for a short while, talking quietly, the city buzzing around them, yet the world had shrunk to just the two of them. By the time they parted for the evening, the protagonist felt a strange mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The encounter had been simple in many ways, yet it carried a weight he could not ignore. He had stepped into uncertainty, and in doing so, had opened a door to something unfamiliar, connection, compassion, and the first spark of change in a life that had grown stale with routine. Walking home, he reflected on the day. The city lights flickered on one by one, illuminating streets he had passed countless times without notice. Tonight, it all looked different. There was possibility in the ordinary, promise in the mundane, and somewhere in the quiet of his apartment, he knew that giving a stranger a chance was not just a kindness. It was the first step toward changing his own destiny. He went to bed that night with a heart that felt heavier and lighter at the same time. Heavy with awareness of the world's hardships, light with the hope that one person could matter, that one act of trust could ripple outward in ways he could not yet imagine. He closed his eyes, ready for sleep, but his mind stayed awake, alive with anticipation, because tomorrow, perhaps, he would discover just how much giving a chance could change everything. The next morning, he woke up with a sense of anticipation he hadn't felt in a long time. The memory of the previous day, the man on the curb, the small exchange of words, the quiet connection, lingered in his mind. He dressed quickly, feeling a strange mix of nervousness and purpose. Something inside him had shifted. He wasn't sure exactly what it meant yet, but he knew he wanted to see the man again, to continue what had begun. He left his apartment earlier than usual, taking the longer route through the streets that led to the park. The city felt different now, as if the ordinary sights had gained new meaning. He noticed the bakery with its warm light spilling onto the sidewalk, the old man sweeping leaves outside a small shop, and the laughter of children waiting at a bus stop. The world seemed alive, full of small details he had overlooked for years. When he arrived at the park, he spotted the man almost immediately. He was sitting on the same curb, wrapped in his worn coat, looking as if he had barely slept. The protagonist approached slowly, unsure how to begin, but the man's face lit up when he saw him. It was a small gesture, but it carried a powerful message: recognition, welcome, and trust. "Good morning," he said softly, unsure if it sounded awkward. The man smiled faintly. "Morning," he replied. "You came back?" "Yes," the protagonist said, feeling the words more meaningful than he expected. "I wanted to check on you, see how you're doing." The man's expression softened. "I appreciate that, not many do." They sat together on the edge of the curb, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. The protagonist reached into his bag and pulled out a few sandwiches, fruit, and a small bottle of water. He handed them to the man, who accepted them with gratitude, as if each item carried a weight beyond its simple form. "Thank you," the man said. "It's not just the food. It's someone caring enough to come back." The protagonist felt a lump in his throat. He realized that the act of showing up, of simply being present, meant more than he had imagined. He had always thought that helping someone required grand gestures or big solutions, but this moment proved otherwise. Sometimes, showing you care was enough to start a change. As they ate, the man began to share more about his life. He spoke slowly, carefully choosing his words, as if each one had been weighed 1,000 times before leaving his lips. He spoke of the job he had lost, the family struggles that followed, and the endless nights spent wondering how he had ended up on the streets. His voice carried no bitterness, only a quiet sadness and a desire to move forward despite the weight of circumstances. The protagonist listened intently. He asked gentle questions, wanting to understand but careful not to pry too deeply. Each word he felt a growing connection, a bridge forming between two people whose lives would have otherwise never crossed paths. He began to understand that the stranger was not just someone in need of help, but a person with hopes, dreams, and the same desire for dignity that he himself felt in his quieter moments of life. After a while, the man asked a question that surprised him. "Why are you helping me?" The protagonist hesitated. He had expected the question, but he hadn't prepared for the answer. "I don't know exactly," he said finally. "Something told me I should, and maybe I needed to do it too. I feel different when I'm here, like I'm part of something that matters." The man nodded slowly, as if he understood perfectly. "Sometimes people forget that helping others helps themselves too. I've seen it happen, but I never thought it could be true for me." They sat in silence for a few minutes, watching the world move around them. The air was crisp and the park carried a quiet energy, as if it too was aware of the small shift happening between these two strangers. Neither of them spoke for a while, content simply to exist in the shared moment, each feeling a subtle but undeniable change stirring inside. After some thought, the protagonist suggested, "Would you like to take a walk with me, just around the park, nothing long? I thought maybe it would be nice to move a little, get some fresh air." The man looked at him, then smiled. "I'd like that." They walked slowly, talking in bits and pieces about trivial things at first, the weather, the city streets, the occasional passerby. But gradually their conversation grew deeper. The man spoke of his skills, things he could do if given a chance, fixing things, working with his hands, even some small office work he had learned over the years. The protagonist listened, impressed by the man's honesty and the humility with which he spoke of his abilities. It became clear to the protagonist that this was more than just a man asking for help. This was someone with potential, someone who had fallen on hard times but had the ability to rise again with the right opportunity. And it sparked something in him, a desire to do more than simply offer temporary aid. He knew it wouldn't be easy. The man had been out of work for a while, had no permanent place to stay, and limited resources. But the protagonist felt a sense of responsibility, not out of obligation, but because he believed that giving a chance was the right thing to do, and he wanted to see what could happen if someone finally had an opportunity to prove themselves. "Would you be interested in working with me?" he asked carefully, unsure how the question would be received. The man stopped walking and looked at him, surprise evident in his eyes. "Working with you? I don't know. I haven't had a real job in a long time. You don't need experience in my field. I can guide you. I just think you deserve a chance," the protagonist said. "If you want it, I'll help you, step by step." For a moment, the man didn't speak. He looked down at his worn shoes, then back up at the protagonist, and something unspoken passed between them. It was a moment of trust, a silent agreement that this was the beginning of something new. I'd like that, the man said finally. Thank you, really. They spent the rest of the morning discussing small plans, how he could start gradually, what tasks he could manage immediately, and how they would approach this carefully to ensure success. The protagonist was careful not to promise too much, knowing that setting realistic expectations was key. But the idea of giving someone a real chance, not just temporary help, felt exhilarating in a way he hadn't anticipated. By midday, they found themselves sitting on a park bench eating a small lunch the protagonist had brought. They talked about simple things again, the city, the neighborhood, favorite foods, small dreams that seemed attainable now. The conversation was light, yet it carried an undertone of hope, a promise that change was possible. As they parted ways, that afternoon, the protagonist felt a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. He didn't know what the next days would bring or whether the man could succeed, but he felt a certainty he hadn't known in years. This choice, this small act of faith, had the potential to change lives. He had stepped into uncertainty, but it felt right. The man looked back at him before disappearing down a side street. "See you tomorrow?" he asked. "Tomorrow," the protagonist replied with a nod. Walking back home, he replayed the day in his mind. The simple act of giving a chance, of believing in someone else had already shifted something within him. It wasn't just about helping another person. It was about seeing possibility, about recognizing that life could change when someone was willing to step forward with trust and compassion. That night, he lay in bed, thinking about the man's smile, the quiet determination he had seen in his eyes and the subtle hope that had taken root in both of them. He realized that giving someone a chance was not just an act of kindness. It was an invitation for growth, for learning, for transformation. And in that moment, he understood that his own life could change too, that this small step could be the start of something far greater than he had ever imagined. He drifted off to sleep with a sense of anticipation, eager for the next day, eager to see how far this chance could go, not just for the stranger, but for himself. He had no idea what the future held, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Giving someone a chance was never wasted, and it might just be the thing that changed everything. The next morning, he woke up with the same sense of purpose that had been stirring in him for days. The memory of the stranger, the man who had captured a part of his attention and his heart, felt like a quiet spark that refused to fade. He dressed, quickly, leaving his apartment with a small bag of food and some basic supplies, thinking that today he wanted to do more than just meet and talk. He wanted to start building something meaningful. By the time he reached the park, he spotted the man sitting on the familiar curb. His coat looked slightly cleaner, as if he had taken care to prepare for the day, but his eyes still carried the weight of nights spent uncertain and uneasy. When their eyes met, the man's faint smile appeared again, the one that had become a small unspoken bridge between them. "Good morning," he said, trying to sound confident even though he felt nervous inside. "Morning," the man replied, his voice warmer than usual. "I was hoping you'd come today." They walked together toward a quiet area of the park where fewer people passed. The protagonist felt the early chill in the air, but he didn't mind. He had been looking forward to this, not just for the act of helping, but for the opportunity to connect on a level deeper than casual acquaintance. "Are you ready to try some small work today?" he asked, careful to keep the question light, not wanting to overwhelm the man. The man nodded, a little hesitation still lingering. "I think so, I don't want to mess it up." "You won't," he said. "We'll take it slow, one step at a time. You only need to try your best." They started with simple tasks, small errands around the neighborhood, organizing a few things in the protagonist's office, and gradually introducing tasks that required more focus and skill. The man worked quietly but efficiently, following instructions carefully, asking questions when needed, and showing a level of determination that surprised the protagonist. It was clear that the time spent waiting for opportunity had not been wasted. He had not lost his abilities or his mind, only needed the chance to use them again. During breaks, they talked more about life, past experiences and dreams that had been left unfinished. The man shared stories of childhood ambitions, jobs he had loved but lost, and moments of pride he had held close despite the struggles. His words were honest, unpolished, but filled with a kind of raw sincerity that made the protagonist pause and reflect. "You've been through a lot," the protagonist said gently. "And yet here you are, still trying. That's not easy." The man looked down, then back up. "Life, it teaches you lessons in ways you don't always like. But I've learned I can survive. That's something, isn't it?" "Yes," he said, feeling the weight of the man's resilience. "It's more than something. It's everything." As the day passed, they encountered small challenges. A few errands didn't go as planned. One delivery was delayed, and a task required more patience than the man expected. At first he became frustrated, muttering under his breath and staring at the ground. But the protagonist stayed patient, offering quiet encouragement and gentle guidance. "You've done well so far," he said. "It's okay if things don't go perfectly. Mistakes aren't the end. They're part of learning." Slowly, the man's tension eased. He listened, nodded, and tried again, showing that with the right support, he could push past fear and doubt. The protagonist felt a growing admiration for him, not just for his skills, but for his ability to face uncertainty and continue despite it. By late afternoon, they had finished most of the tasks they had planned for the day. The man wiped sweat from his brow, and the protagonist offered him a drink and a small snack. They sat together on the edge of the park, watching children play in the distance and couples walking hand in hand. The city felt alive, not as a place of chaos, but as a backdrop to a story that was slowly unfolding between them. "You know," the man said quietly, "I never thought someone would actually trust me to do something important. I've been overlooked so many times. Most people just walk by." "That's why I came back," the protagonist replied. "I wanted to see if you could do it. And more than that, I wanted to give you a chance to believe in yourself." The man's eyes softened, and a small smile appeared. I think I can. Maybe for the first time in a long time, I actually believe that I can do something right." The protagonist felt a warmth in his chest. He realized that this relationship was no longer about simple charity or assistance. It was about mutual growth, trust, and the quiet power of believing in someone when they couldn't believe in themselves. And in that belief, he found a reflection of his own life, a reminder that giving and receiving support were not separate acts, but part of the same human experience. Over the next few days, their routine developed. Each morning they met at the park, and each day the tasks became a little more challenging, a little more meaningful. The man learned quickly, adapting to new responsibilities and even suggesting ways to improve tasks, showing creativity and initiative that surprised the protagonist. Each small success built confidence, and each setback became a learning opportunity. The protagonist noticed subtle changes in himself as well. He felt more alive, more engaged with the world. Helping the man had awakened something he had long forgotten, the feeling that life could be purposeful, that his actions could matter, that connections could transform ordinary days into something extraordinary. One evening, as they were wrapping up a longer day, the man paused and looked at him seriously. "I've been thinking. I don't just want to survive anymore. I want to contribute. I want to do more than just get by. And I think I can with your help." The protagonist nodded. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say. You've got the skills, the determination, and now the opportunity. Together, we can figure out what comes next." The man smiled, and for the first time, it was a smile that seemed free from worry or doubt. It carried hope, possibility, and a quiet pride in his own resilience. The protagonist felt a surge of satisfaction, not from controlling the outcome, but from witnessing the transformation, the beginning of a life being rebuilt step by step. The days continued like this, a mix of work, conversation, and small victories. They celebrated each success, no matter how minor, with quiet acknowledgement or a shared laugh. The man began to look forward to the mornings. not with fear of judgment, but with anticipation for what could be achieved. And the protagonist, in turn, looked forward to seeing the change in the man's eyes, the spark that grew brighter with each passing day. One afternoon, while taking a short break under a large tree, the man asked a question that made the protagonist pause. "Why are you doing this for me? Why take a stranger and give him a chance when so many others don't?" The protagonist thought for a moment, then answered honestly, "I don't know exactly. Maybe I saw something in you that reminded me of what I hoped for myself. Maybe I wanted to do something meaningful for someone, and I realized that helping you could also change me. It's not just about giving, it's about growing." The man nodded slowly, absorbing the words. I think I understand. You've given me more than work or food. You've given me a chance to feel alive again. And maybe you've reminded me what it feels like to hope." For a long while they sat quietly, letting the wind move through the branches above them, and the city's distant sounds fill the space around them. The connection between them had grown beyond simple trust or necessity. It had become something deeper, something that spoke to the human need for understanding, for recognition, for the belief that one's life mattered. The protagonist realized that in helping this man, he had discovered parts of himself he hadn't known were missing. Patience, empathy, courage, and the willingness to step into the unknown had all grown within him, nurtured by the act of believing in someone else. And as he watched the man rise from the bench with a newfound confidence, ready to tackle the next task, he understood something powerful. Sometimes giving a chance to another person is the key to finding your own strength. By the time evening fell, they had completed a full day of work and conversation. The man returned to a temporary shelter the protagonist had helped him find, and they parted with a promise to meet again the next morning. Walking home, the protagonist reflected on the progress made, the small victories achieved, and the bond that had formed. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. Challenges would come, doubts would surface, and the world might not always be kind. But for the first time in a long while, he felt ready to face whatever came next. He had discovered that transformation was possible, both for the man and for himself, as long as they continued to believe, to act, and to support one another. That night he went to bed with a quiet sense of fulfillment. The city outside hummed with life, unaware of the small miracle unfolding in its midst. Two lives, once separate and ordinary, were beginning to change, step by step, task by task, moment by moment. And in that change he found hope, not just for the man he was helping, but for himself and for the simple, profound truth that giving someone a chance could open the door to a destiny neither of them had expected. The days turned into weeks, and slowly, their routine became something both of them looked forward to. The man was changing before his eyes. He stood straighter, spoke with more confidence, and carried a quiet pride in the work he did. Each morning he showed up on time, ready to help, ready to learn. The change was subtle but steady, like watching dawn replace the night one shade of light at a time. The protagonist also felt the difference within himself. He woke up each day with purpose. The emptiness that used to follow him like a shadow had started to fade. The simple act of helping another person had brought a new rhythm to his life. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was just existing. He was living. But change, no matter how good, often comes with its own set of challenges. One cold morning, as they were finishing a task outside the small office where the man had started helping part-time, a few co-workers began to whisper. The protagonist noticed the glances, the quiet chuckles, and the subtle judgment. "Who's that guy?" one of them asked when they thought he couldn't hear. "You sure it's smart to have him around? You don't really know where he's been." He ignored the comment, but it lingered in his mind like a small thorn. People always found reasons to doubt, especially when they didn't understand. The man had worked hard, had proven himself trustworthy, yet still faced the weight of other people's assumptions. Later that day, the man noticed something was off. "People don't like me being here, do they?" he asked quietly, his eyes cast down. The protagonist hesitated, not wanting to lie. "Some people don't understand yet," he said honestly. "But that's their problem, not yours. You've done nothing wrong." The man gave a small nod, though the hurt was clear in his eyes. "I'm used to it," he said softly. People look at me and see what they want to see. But I'm not going to give up. Not this time. Those words struck deep. The protagonist realized that while he had given the man a chance, the world wasn't so quick to do the same. It made him angry, not at anyone in particular, but at how unfair life could be to those who tried to rise after falling. In the following days, they both worked harder. The man's dedication never wavered. He took on new tasks, learned quickly, and even started helping others at the office with small things. Slowly, the same coworkers who once doubted him began to see his effort. A few started offering polite smiles, some even small talk. Change was happening, but it wasn't easy. Then one afternoon, a small mistake nearly undid everything. They were handling a delivery order for a client, something simple but time-sensitive. The man accidentally mixed up 2 boxes, sending the wrong items to the wrong address. It wasn't a huge problem, but it caused a short delay and one of the clients complained loudly. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The same coworker who had questioned him before was quick to speak up. "I told you this would happen," he said. "You can't just bring anyone in off the street?" The man's face fell. He apologized immediately, offering to fix the issue, but the damage had been done. The protagonist felt the frustration rising inside him, not at the mistake, but at how quickly people were ready to tear someone down after one slip. He handled the situation calmly, helped sort out the mix-up, and made sure the client received what they needed. When everything was finally settled, he found the man sitting outside, his hands folded tightly, staring at the ground. "I messed up," the man said quietly. "I knew it was too good to last." The protagonist sat beside him. "You didn't ruin anything," he said firmly. "Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what you do next." The man shook his head. "People like me don't get second mistakes. One wrong move and it's over. That's how it's always been." The words carried pain, the kind that only comes from years of being written off too soon. The protagonist looked at him and realized that for the man, this wasn't just about the job. It was about his entire life. Every chance he'd ever been given had been fragile, breakable, conditional. "You're not people like you anymore," the protagonist said gently. "You're someone who's trying, and you've got someone standing beside you this time. We'll fix this together." Something in the man's expression changed. The defeat in his eyes softened, replaced by a flicker of determination. "Together," he repeated, almost like he was testing the word. "All right, I'll do better," and he did. The very next day, he worked twice as hard, checking every small detail, taking notes, asking questions. It wasn't about fear of failure. It was about proving to himself that he could rise again. Watching him, the protagonist felt a quiet admiration that words couldn't express. A week later, the same client who had complained earlier sent a note of appreciation. The man had gone out of his way to correct the issue personally, ensuring everything was perfect. "That man of yours," the client wrote, "he's one of the most responsible workers I've met." The protagonist showed the message to him, and for a moment, the man didn't know what to say. His eyes grew misty, his lips trembling just slightly. "No one's ever called me that before," he said finally. Responsible. That moment stayed with both of them. It was more than praise. It was validation. Proof that change was possible when someone believed in you long enough for you to believe in yourself. But life wasn't done testing them yet. A few days later, heavy rain hit the city, flooding parts of the streets and damaging some of the supplies they had been working with. It was frustrating and tiring, and the man took it hard, blaming himself for things beyond his control. The protagonist had to remind him that life's setbacks weren't punishments. They were just part of the journey. "Remember how you said you used to survive?" he told him. "Well, now you're learning how to live. Living means facing things like this, not running from them." The man nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. "You really think I can make it?" "I don't think," the protagonist replied with a faint smile. "I know." That reassurance seemed to steady him. Together they cleaned, repaired, and reorganized everything they could. It took long hours, but they managed to bring things back in order. By the time they finished, both were exhausted but filled with quiet satisfaction. That night, as they shared a meal at a small corner cafe, the first time the man had eaten at a restaurant in years, he said something that made the protagonist pause. "When you first stopped and talked to me, I thought it was just a moment of pity. I didn't think it would last, but you kept showing up. You didn't walk away. You have no idea what that means to someone like me. I didn't do anything special, the protagonist said softly. I just did what anyone should do if they have the chance. The man shook his head. That's just it. Most people don't. You didn't just give me a chance. You gave me a reason to believe I still had one. The air grew quiet between them, the hum of the cafe filling the space. The protagonist realized that helping this man hadn't just changed the stranger's life, it had changed his own. He had found purpose, compassion, and meaning in a world that once felt dull and disconnected. Over time, the people around them began to notice the difference too. The same coworkers who once doubted now respected the man's work. Clients appreciated his reliability, and for the first time in a long while, the protagonist felt proud, not just of helping someone, but of being part of a story of change. Still, he knew there was more to come. The road wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more tests, and more lessons to learn. But he also knew that whatever came next, they would face it together, with the same trust, the same quiet strength, and the same belief that kindness could rewrite a destiny. That night, as he walked home under a sky that had cleared after the storm, he thought about how far they had both come. What had started as a simple act of kindness had grown into something larger, a reminder that the smallest decision, the quietest gesture, could ripple through lives in ways unimaginable. He smiled to himself, the city lights reflecting in puddles on the ground. For the first time in years, the future didn't seem uncertain. It seemed alive with possibility. He didn't know exactly where the road would lead, but he knew this much. Giving a stranger a chance had not only changed one life, it had forever changed two. Months passed, and what started as a small act of kindness had turned into something neither of them could have imagined. The man had now become a full-time part of the workplace. His confidence had grown, his manner had changed, and his eyes carried a light that wasn't there before. He had rebuilt not just his life, but his sense of worth. The protagonist often watched him with quiet pride. He had seen every step of that transformation, from hesitation to trust, from doubt to belief. And in helping the man, he had also found something he didn't know he was missing, a sense of purpose that went beyond success or recognition. One morning, as they sat outside the office sharing tea before starting their day, the man turned to him and said something unexpected. You know, he began slowly, I've been thinking. I want to do for someone else what you did for me. The protagonist looked up from his cup, curious. What do you mean? The man paused, searching for the right words. There are so many people out there like I was, lost, tired, waiting for someone to believe in them. Maybe it's time I try to give someone that same chance. Those words hit deep. For a moment, the protagonist didn't speak. It was strange. The person who once stood in darkness now wanted to be the light for someone else. It was the kind of change that couldn't be measured in time or money. It came from the heart. That's a beautiful thought, the protagonist said finally. If you can do that for even one person, then everything you went through will mean something even greater. The man smiled faintly. You gave me a second chance at life. I think it's my turn to pass it on. The following week, the man started volunteering at a local shelter during his off hours. He didn't talk much about it, but the protagonist knew he was helping others find their footing, just as someone once helped him. There was something poetic about it, how the circle of kindness had quietly continued without fanfare or attention. But life, as always, had its twists. A few months later, the company faced a financial setback. Some contracts were delayed, and a few people had to be let go temporarily. The mood at work shifted. Tension grew, uncertainty crept in. The man was worried. If things get worse, I can leave for a while, he said one afternoon, his tone humble. You've done enough for me already. I don't want to be a burden. The protagonist looked at him firmly. You're not a burden, he said. You're part of this place now. We'll figure it out. He meant every word. This man wasn't just someone he helped anymore. He was family in a way that didn't need to be defined. They had built something stronger than work, a bond of trust, respect, and shared humanity. Even in those difficult weeks, the man stayed positive. He encouraged others, lifted spirits, and kept showing up with the same quiet determination that had gotten him this far. His strength reminded the protagonist that resilience isn't about avoiding hardship. It's about facing it with heart. One evening, after a long day, they sat together outside as the sky turned orange. The air was cool, and the sounds of the city blended softly in the background. The protagonist broke the silence. "You ever think about how far you've come?" The man laughed softly. "Every day. Sometimes I still wake up expecting it all to disappear, like it was just a dream. But then I see where I am and realize it's real. It's strange, how one moment can change everything." "What moment was that for you?" He looked thoughtful. "That day you stopped to talk to me. I remember I was ready to give up. I didn't think anyone would ever look at me without judgment again. And then you came along asking if I needed help. I almost didn't answer you. But something inside me told me to take that chance." The protagonist smiled quietly. "And I'm glad you did." "Me too," the man said, his voice low. "You didn't just give me work. You gave me back my dignity." There was a long pause. Words weren't needed anymore. The silence between them felt full of understanding, gratitude, and shared memory. As months passed, the man continued to grow, not just at work but in life. He started saving money, moved into a small apartment, and even began taking evening classes. It was slow progress, but it was steady. Every step he took was a reminder that new beginnings are always possible, no matter how far someone has fallen. One afternoon, he brought the protagonist a small envelope. "This is for you," he said shyly. Inside was a simple handwritten note that read, "Thank you for seeing the person I could be, not just the person I was." The handwriting was shaky, the words uneven, but the meaning behind them was powerful. The protagonist read it twice, his chest tightening with emotion. He didn't need fancy words. That single sentence carried the weight of everything they had shared. Over time, their bond turned into something unspoken but strong. They didn't talk about gratitude or sacrifice anymore. They just lived it. They helped each other through quiet gestures, a shared meal, a word of encouragement, a simple nod on a hard day. Years later, when the man finally opened his own small repair shop, something he had dreamed of quietly, the protagonist was there at the opening. The sign was simple, the place modest, but the pride in his eyes made it grander than any big business. During the small gathering, the man spoke briefly. "A long time ago," he said to the few friends and customers present, "someone gave me a chance when I didn't think I deserved one. Everything you see here, every nail, every tool, every bit of this exists because of that one act of kindness. So if you ever meet someone who needs a hand, don't hesitate. You never know. You might be changing a destiny without even realizing it." The crowd clapped softly, but the protagonist stood quietly, his heart full. It was strange to think that one decision made on an ordinary day had led to all this. After everyone left, the man walked up to him. "You know," he said, "you didn't just change my life. You changed yours too. You found something you didn't even know you needed." The protagonist nodded slowly. "You're right. I thought I was helping you, but in truth you helped me just as much." They stood there in quiet understanding, surrounded by the small workshop that now smelled of wood, oil, and new beginnings. Years later, whenever the protagonist looked back, he realized how simple yet powerful that moment of choice had been. A simple yes to a stranger had set in motion a story of hope, trust, and transformation. It taught him that life's biggest changes don't always come from grand plans or perfect timing. Sometimes they come from a single act of kindness, a decision to stop and see someone when everyone else walks past. He often shared that thought with others whenever he could. "You never lose by being kind," he would say. "Sometimes you think you're saving someone, but in truth, you're saving yourself too." And as for the man, he continued to live with quiet gratitude, helping others whenever he could, always remembering that once in his darkest hour, someone had looked at him and seen more than his mistakes. Their paths remained connected not out of obligation, but out of friendship, a bond built on something real and lasting. Many people came and went in their lives over the years, but whenever they crossed paths again, maybe for a coffee, maybe for advice, and there was always that same shared look of mutual respect, a silent reminder of where it all began, one man choosing to give a stranger a chance. And in doing so, both of them had changed forever.